For a time, I was entrenched in puppy girl culture online. Am I still? Well, yeah, but now I get to write off all the collars I bought as a business expense. And if these don't get written off, I am fucked. Anyways, I'm going to acknowledge the absurdity of the subject matter now, and I understand that it is a little silly. However, I think engaging critically with kink cultures within the trans community really reveals a lot about how transness is seen at large, and how subverting or leaning into those ideas help people within them build a sense of self. Also, it is just kind of funny. Man, someone should tweet that. What inspired this video and will be referenced heavily throughout is the research paper, What Puppy Girls Know, the Inhuman Pedagogy of a Trans Feminine Style, published in August of last year, written by Jay Spielke. I find the points she brings up to be really interesting, and I hope to break down some of the key concepts found in her paper. I recommend you give it a read if you haven't already, but I'll do my best to make it understandable if you haven't. To know what puppy girls know, and to answer my question, why there seems to be so many, we need to first define what that even means. What are the shared characteristics and behaviors found among those who describe themselves as puppy girls online? Spielke opts to call puppy girl culture an erotic style, a shared but constantly evolving set of aesthetics, narratives, and sexual scripts that can be further assumed, refused, tinkered with, or fundamentally reworked. In general, this erotic style has been developed in online trans feminine spaces in which a presumed trans, presumed gay woman, usually young and white, assumes a highly sexualized submissive role of a puppy. This can involve things like ears, tails, collars, leashes, whatever, but these items aren't necessarily what makes one a puppy girl. Rather, it's a set of ideas placed upon or adopted by an individual, usually involving things like general submission, dependence, vulnerability, and a low capacity for thought. These are quote-unquote puppy-like characteristics that we see time and time again expressed in these spaces. It's also important to not conflate this erotic style with the pup play subculture seen in predominantly gay male spaces. You can discern the difference between the two by paying attention to what clips politicians seem to keep on their hard drives. Do you think US Congressman Randy Fine understands the intricacies that differentiate pup play from puppy girls? I can explain it to him. Randy, hit my line. Okay, so puppy girls tend to be trans lesbians that express submissive behavior and lean into puppy-like qualities and characteristics. One thing that I was curious about was, why is it trans lesbians specifically? Not to say it's exclusive to them, but why don't we see more cis lesbians, or God forbid, straight trans girls engaging in puppy girl culture? Well, I think this is for a couple of reasons. The first of which Spielke brings up being the long history of forced feminization fantasies found in erotic trans femme culture. This typically looks like having the identity of a girl, woman, female forced onto the subject in one way or another. I find these discussions are often difficult to have because so many people wrongfully hold the belief that being a trans woman is the result of this perceived fetishization of a forced womanhood. This is not the case. There's a lot to be said that I won't be getting into, but the forced femme erotic fantasies and puppy girl culture are intertwined in several ways. The most apparent is the forcing of the title. While you can identify yourself as a puppy girl, and many do, that doesn't mean much without the reinforcement of that identity by those around you. I find that a big part of this culture comes in the form of teasing from others. This subtle or not so subtle reinforcement of your status as a puppy girl. Maybe having a clicker on your Discord soundboard saying good girl to make someone embarrassed, or pointing out those puppy-like behaviors in a condescending tone. And with all this said, inherently, being a puppy girl also makes one, well, a girl. Thus, when these teasing behaviors are being expressed, not only does it work to hammer home one's puppy status, but also their status as a girl. Obviously, there are those who don't identify as a girl that participate in this culture. I think that's understood. I'm largely generalizing, of course. That affirming behavior to one's identity is a massive draw for young trans girls, but we'll put a pin in that for now. So the why lesbians part of my original question is a little more nebulous and definitely overlaps with the transness aspect. Contrary to popular conservative rhetoric, trans women do indeed date each other, and in large numbers too. To prove this theory, I need every trans woman to DM me photos of them kissing their Sorry, moment of weakness. In my own experiences, I think that trans girls who are just coming out and being comfortable and expressing that side of themselves will often confide in other trans women first and foremost. And with the culture almost solely comprised of trans women, it's not really surprising to see a high percentage of T for T lesbianism. There's a lot of vulnerability, both physically, but more importantly, emotionally involved in being a puppy girl, so I think it makes sense that this space has a large number of lesbian-identified women finding connections. Alright, so with the knowledge of what a puppy girl is and who comprises a large majority of puppy girls, what's the draw? What is the so-called puppy girl pandemic? And if that isn't the title of this video, that's gonna be really awkward. Honestly, I'm kind of late to the conversation about puppy girls. I see more deer girls, bunny girls, hell, even cat girls are making a resurgence. Though, I think that puppy girl culture has ingrained itself in online transfem spaces more than any other insert cute animal girl prior, or that we've seen since. As stated previously, and at least anecdotally, I see an overwhelming amount of those engaging with puppy girl culture being young trans women. When I say young, while I am referring to literal age, I also think time on hormones or time spent after recognizing one's trans identity plays a big factor in who stumbles into and stays in these spaces. The reason the second part is important, and quoting Spielke, it's simply hard for a trans woman to feel secure enough to be the source of her own affirmation. This is why external, community-based relationships are so vital for sustaining trans life. She continues by saying, many of us receive our gendered, sexed sense of self not from personal identity work, but through participation in networks of mutual care, love, and affirmation with other trans people, who are far more likely to gift us with unconditional recognition that we are ourselves. Puppy girls are an extreme case of just that. Meaning that, in general, it's tough to be your own #1 supporter as a trans woman, as you have been so conditioned to tear yourself down through your own dysphoric lens. This is most prevalent in trans girls who are just starting to get a hold of who they are, grappling with an enormous vat of emotions that have been bottled up for a lifetime. So coming into a community that provides that unconditional support regardless of how you may perceive yourself or how others in daily life may perceive you, it's overwhelmingly affirming. There's the obvious caveat of this primarily being online and people being mean, particularly trans women love tearing down one another online, but I think it's understood that there will always be bad actors, or I guess bad actresses, regardless of how otherwise supportive a community may be. Being called a puppy girl is potentially the most affirming thing that you have experienced up until this point. It's cathartic to not have to prove anything to be bestowed with this label. The council has decided that you express puppy-like qualities, and so you are a puppy, but also, importantly, a girl. Spielke shares that her first encounters with this culture were through memes being shared in a trans Discord server. Then she says she became an active participant in sharing these memes herself. I think this is a pretty universal canon event among trans girls online. I'm not sure when I came across the term puppy girl for the first time, but I know it was early into my transition. And this may come as a shock to no one, but I definitely liked the label of puppy girl and engaged with a lot of content surrounding the culture. Now though, I've fallen out of the so-called puppy girl pipeline, and there's a few factors that have caused that to happen. My hormone levels are like normal, so I think that's probably a factor, but I also never seriously entered these spaces. I found myself hanging around the outskirts, and I didn't see being a puppy girl as my entire identity. It was just kind of a funny thing that was nice and affirming. I was also fortunate enough to have support outside of online trans spaces, and so the puppy girl behavior was never really reinforced or encouraged by those who I hung out with. This isn't to say being a puppy girl is bad or anything, no, of course not. It's just that I kind of figured out it wasn't for me. There's more to it than just being affirming though, and through everything I've said thus far, I have largely ignored the puppy part of it outside of what it means to exhibit puppy-like behavior. This is because I think it varies a lot depending on the individual, and so everyone interacts with it in their own ways. One thing that is present regardless is the giving up or the removal of one's personhood. To be a puppy is to rid oneself of their humanness, to remove yourself from the social prejudices and struggles that are ever present when living as a trans woman, even just for a moment. Not only that, but this is something that is encouraged and rewarded in this culture. As Spielke puts it, there is something liberating about the fact that the puppy girl's desire to debase herself for love, care, and recognition can be presented without the need to defend it as valid or permissible, just as there is a perverse pleasure in allowing oneself to be weak and pathetic without struggling to be anything more. A large part of her paper and her ultimate conclusion revolve around trans people's continued exclusion from a world, which denounces exceptional gender expression and its definition of human. To quote again, the dominant modes of belonging to the category of human are rooted in cis-sexist, sanist, and racist ideas of who gets to count as a human. In fact, trans people continue to be routinely denied access to humanity by various social movements that seek to define humanity in such a way as to explicitly make it cis only. The way this links back to everything we've been talking about is how, instead of trying to argue against this exclusion, the puppy girl culture gleefully engages in it for pleasure. If the category of human was never home for kinky transbians, it asks, why not leave it all together and become a puppy? I think one of the reasons I stopped engaging with puppy girl stuff online, thank God Twitter likes are private, you can't prove this otherwise, is that while it does feel good to remove yourself from all this stuff, I kept getting caught up on it being temporary, a quick band-aid fix to a much larger issue. As I talked about in a previous episode, I'm someone who's struggled with a slew of dissociative problems in the past, like many others, and I didn't really like feeling that I was back in that headspace. Better YouTuber in person, Leadhead, has a video where she discusses the dissociative aspects of being a puppy girl through her own experiences and what it looks like when that gets taken too far. I really recommend watching that one if you haven't. It's stuck with me for quite a while now. I think it all comes back to escapism, and being a puppy girl elicits a particular kind of escapist quality, and that not only are you leaving behind liberal ideas of gender or sexual identity, but there's that pleasure and even shame in indulging in this fantasy. In a way, it goes against a lot of what is being fought for and mirrors the downward social mobility faced by trans women in society. But here it's in a more controlled environment where you're assured love and affirmation for just existing. That's why I think it's so interesting, because while the idea of the puppy girl does subvert existing norms of what it means to express trans femininity, it also plays into the larger system that denies this expression in a shameful, kinky, pleasurable way, almost reclaiming the very system that necessitates this escapist act. Now, do I think Twitter user @GoodPuppy900 knows all of this? No, and I don't think any of this is really at the forefront of her mind right now. She's more focused on her Balatro run. But I think taking this kind of silly, pretty cringy subculture a little seriously can show us a lot about evolving ideas of what it means to engage with the world as a trans woman. Spielke's original question of what puppy girls know is answered at the end of her paper, where she writes, "This is what puppy girls know, that you don't have to fit in within the narrow constraints of the human to be loved, desired, and cared for, that you need not be valued for your capacity to engage with fundamentally trans-antagonistic structures of daily survival, that transness can be more than just an exercise in mimicking modes of living that were never meant for us." It's true, there are so many systems in place that actively, or even unknowingly, work to force trans people out of society. I don't need to tell you this. Chances are you're all too aware of how any given day another bill called the Fuck You I Hate Trannies Act will be signed into law. It's hard to find solace in a world like that, and so being able to forget about all that just for a moment and be seen and loved for who you are is unbelievably important. A large reason why we find puppy girls primarily online is because unless you live in fucking Seattle, chances are there aren't that many other trans people around. Being reminded that there is a community, that there are voices, is what keeps us all going. Okay, this is getting a little too serious, so I'm gonna show you something funny I found that I didn't know where to put. So Botted Blue Check @SwipeRight, in response to Spielke's paper being published, had this to say. In other words, this paper suggests expanding the ideas of trans beyond crossing sex boundaries to include crossing species boundaries, which, you know, is not the paper. But my favorite part of the tweet is, it gets darker. Yeah, man, this is some dark stuff. Like a puppy girl is a good girl. Oh my god, this is just too much for me. Anyways, I hope you took something away from this video. I debated on not making it for a very, very long time because it is kind of silly, but you know what? Sometimes you just want to be a little silly. This video would not have been possible without Jay Spielke's paper, as well as all the other papers she cites throughout it, which I also skimmed through a few of those. I also just think it's so cool that she wrote this. I don't know, it's a lot of fun. Now, if you excuse me, oh fuck, it's the IRS, and for some reason, they didn't believe that the $20,000 I transferred to an offshore bank account was all for callers. They clearly don't understand how this will impact the Discord polycule.